natural techniques has been taken over in today's world by purchased organic fertilizers. Why are you purchasing organic matter? There is nothing easier to create on your own farm. All you need is a seed, soil, sunlight, and CO2. And yet we are running now, as I see all over the place, organic farming as if it's chemical farming, as if you have to buy in all of these nutrients. In chemical farming, you absolutely have to do that because you have nothing else to work with. But on the organic farm, my gosh, the amount of biological fertility you can create yourself just by growing green manures and cover crops.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Lindley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish organic crops that are grown in healthy soils and organic livestock that is raised on well-managed pasture. You just heard from Eliot Coleman, one of our country's most influential organic farmers and a big proponent of growing fertility right on the farm to create what he calls a perpetually renewable system that builds soil organic matter. Eliot is a champion of the Real Organic movement and will be featured in our upcoming symposium, Break 'em Up, the chickenization of organic. Session 1 begins on Sunday, March 17th from 3 to 5 Eastern, and the second session is April 7th from 3 to 5 Eastern. You can find out all the details by visiting our main menu of our website, realorganicproject.org.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast, and I'm continuing a long conversation I've been having with Eliot Coleman for many years. Eliot, we talked for hours last night about a lot of stuff. I'd like to go back and touch on some of it. It seemed like for me, the theme that we were going around is sort of the relationship of the individual to the group of people, and one of the things that has been interesting to me in the last months is I've been sort of wrestling with Zephyr Teachout's separation of these two forms of civil disobedience, Henry David Thoreau and Martin Luther King, and they both practiced civil disobedience, but Thoreau's disobedience was based on creating alignment between his inner values and his outer actions. And King's was the same, but it was also always guided by how do I change the laws? How do I change society? So it definitely had an added component that was quite different. And in Zephyr's book, Break 'em Up, she talks about kind of these two strategies that people use for approaching the things that they don't agree with in our world. What do either of those or both of those ring a bell for you?
I suppose my favorite scene in a movie that deals with the idea of objecting to things that you don't agree with was in Gandhi. And it was during the salt problem when the Indians had been going down to the ocean and drying water to get salt. And the Brits had decided that they owned salt and the people had to buy it. And he rounded up these people, all the Indian farmers and other protesters. And they were at the beach and they were trying to walk onto the beach. And this whole group of Brits were defending the beach and wouldn't let them through. And row by row, 4 of these guys would march forward, and the Brits would beat them over the head with clubs until they fell to the ground, and the women would come and drag them off, and then another 4 would walk forward. And it was the most powerful thing I ever saw, people saying, no, I'm sorry, you can't do that. And at the time, there was a character in the movie who was a reporter for a British paper. And he said, he's phoning in his story. And he said, today, Britain lost the moral high ground. Because there was just no way that you could think you had anything to say to people who were willing to walk forward and get beaten on the head, row after row of them, determined people. And that's my attitude toward any of these schemes where some other group is trying to take over an idea, and that's the thing we're facing right now with organic. And you just have to stand there or walk forward and keep saying no. And whether you're going to tie that up with eventually changing the law, which was what Gandhi was hoping to achieve, or you're just standing up for what you believe in, is there any difference? Oh, I suppose there is in the eventual outcome of this. But to see people who cared so much about an issue and were willing to put their bodies on the line, that was, I'd never seen a scene in a movie that was more powerful than that.
Yeah. Another thing connected to this we talked about last night was the understanding that food and the food system is kind of a great crossroads for so many of the issues that we contend with.
I agree. It is part of almost every problem out there. Yeah.
I think until people start to get that understanding, they think that this is an issue for foodies. They use that term, and I hate the term. And it seems so diminutive to care about food when you address it that way. Could you talk a little bit about why you think it's the crossroads? Why is it so central?
The issue in all of this that gets to me is what organic farming offers is the most intimate understanding of the way the natural world works. And to have it set now because of the influx of non-organic product being sold as organic, the whole comprehension of what organic has done is getting totally lost. There is a mystery going on out there when I plant a seed, and if the soil is right, it grows into food that is nourishing people correctly. And there is no question that that is true. I mean, when you read some of this research from Holland about the soil microbiome and what's going on around the roots of the plant, and the plant can actually give off exudates that stimulate the bacteria that help make it more resistant to pests. I mean, this is miraculous stuff. This is, holy cow, where did that come from? So all of this is going on, and yet we're being told that hydroponic is organic. And what the organic world offers is the beginning of an understanding of the mysteries out there that are truly fantastic mysteries. That I'm on this little farm out in the middle of nowhere in Maine, And even in this location with no resources at all, we've been able to create a soil that grows the most beautiful and tasty food anyone has ever seen with no pests. And yet, because no one is paying attention to the real organic, the understanding of that has just totally disappeared. I mean, when people ask me to explain why I've been doing this for so long, I usually mystically tell them that every day I get to commune with the secret of the universe. And this is actually what's going on. It's just unbelievable if you pay attention to what's going on a good organic farm. And there is so much of a message there. And I'm not talking about the effects of the message and the way that fits into everything, and I agree with that, and that's absolutely true. But if you don't become aware of the mysteries that are going on out there, there's no way you're going to understand all the other things and how if you ate well, you wouldn't have diabetes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So people are being denied an understanding of what real organic farming is actually doing.
Yes, I agree. And it was, I would say, inevitable that we would come to this pass in our culture. So it's not a surprise that this battle is going on.
Well, you can't monetize the values I'm talking about. And so the thing you can monetize is calling it organic. I mean, you know, the Coalition for Sustainable Organic saying what we really need is more organic food, so we're just going to call this stuff organic.
Yeah.
I mean, this is, and the thing that makes that possible is all of our supposed one-time friends who have jumped ship. So I don't know if the Organic Trade Association was ever worth anything to organic, but it has no value at all except to the other side. And CCOF has become such a pale shadow, not even a shadow of what it once was, but almost the opposite of what it once was. So how the heck are we going to make these points when there are these organizations that everybody thinks are the gold standards of an organic organization that are fighting against it?
Well, it's interesting. Zephyr, in her book, talks about trade associations as following exactly this game book. And she wasn't talking about the Organic Trade Association. She was talking about this is what happens. Trade associations connect a bunch of small players, and then they work for the big players who fund them. But they do it in the name of everybody, and people are always confused by this, and they're always, I think that's my point. These are almost impersonal struggles that we're having to go through. And yeah, it is about money. I'm curious, you've been around the world a lot, Eliot. You've seen a lot of world organic agriculture. And do other cultures approach this differently? I mean, is America special in the degree to which money trumps all?
Oh, I suspect that's a universal sickness. No, I have visited peasant groups in parts of the world where they just instinctively understand what's going on, and how if you plug into that, you're going to get the food that you need and everything. And especially Well, I was just reading about Brazil. Brazil is one of the centers of using rock powders like basalt as fertilizers. And what they found out on their soils down there, that if they buy fertilizers in the world market, and they don't produce any of them themselves, so this is a big expense, their soils are not programmed to use those fertilizers like they should be used, and a lot of them leach out almost instantly. However, if they use things like finely ground basalt, which is a waste product of the rock crushing industry, it is slowly made available in the soil by all the biological powers that are in charge in the soil. And some of this stuff was just fantastic. They are getting yields better than they did with purchased P and K by using basalt dust. And so these people, because they're closer to the reality of feeding themselves so they don't starve, are probably a lot more alert to some of these messages than people would be who were just trying to make money by selling organic.
So I was one of the large group, and you were too, who came into this completely non-economically. It wasn't a business opportunity. We had an excitement. You could call it romantic. You could call it an ethical belief system. Something about it presented something with a lot of meaning, and we pursued that. And then after a while, we said, geez, we need to figure out how to make a living at this if this is what we do. If I don't have a day job, then we did, and we all started farms that actually were economic entities. I think there's still a huge difference between that and somebody who says, the reason I'm here is to make money, and this is the arena in which I'm going to do it.
They're in the wrong arena.
They're in the wrong arena.
Yeah. I mean, when you read that 40% of the income of U.S. farms in general is coming from government subsidies.
Yeah.
Who would want to get into something like that?
Yeah.
Thinking they're going to make a lot of money. Yeah.
Well, and we see that most of that goes to subsidize the wrong things.
Yes.
So it's actually enabling a bad agriculture that is destructive.
Oh, and then the government compounds this all with their climate smart agriculture and all of this stuff, which hasn't been thought out past the very front edge of these ideas. And it's actually going against what they're trying to do. It's that badly planned.
Yeah. I see that there's a lot of confusion around it because people celebrate that the government is trying to do something, that the USDA is saying, acknowledging that how we farm has a big impact on climate, and can we do better? And I'm sure that, I talked to Michael Pollan about this, and he said, well, some of it is going to do something good, but a lot of it is not. I won't speak for Pollan, I'll speak for me. That a lot of it is not going to do something good. And the question is, what gets lost in that transaction? And I think that's the danger here. Organic is being actually pushed aside in Congress by, I was talking to somebody who works a lot in Congress, and she said, if you want to talk about regenerative, everyone's all ears and excited. If you talk about organic, they don't want to talk about it. Well, how can you celebrate something that you would call regenerative agriculture and not celebrate organic?
Yeah, well, we were just talking about how that film Kiss the Earth was so disappointing, and that the new second film like that actually goes out of its way to explain that regenerative doesn't mean using glyphosate and things like that.
Yeah.
And that's a hopeful step, because the trouble with that first film, all the speakers were well-known celebrities. There weren't, it's hardly a farmer in the film.
Yeah.
And so it was just people who were impressed by the myth.
I mean, when I look at the large list of people involved, I think they're incredibly well-meaning. And, so I don't think that they approach that cynically. I think that they didn't understand things.
Yes.
But it's not, I don't call that greenwashing. I call that not having a deep understanding. That's different.
Yeah.
And I think that their intentions were very positive.
But the result was disappointing.
The result was disappointing. It was a start. What I think is critical in all of that is that if they want to call it regenerative, there needs to be a real regenerative movement. That it's just that simple.
Yeah.
And they should use those words,
Well, they got stolen before they even got started.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. But there are a lot of people who do mean something very positive by that term regenerative, very positive.
Yeah.
And that's fine, but I think that they need to make clear that they're not with Syngenta, they're not with Bayer, who are defining the terms now for the world.
Well, then, speaking about Bayer, that letter I sent you from the Spanish regenerative farmers writing to Bayer and say, hey guys, you aren't in charge of this. There is no natural connection between glyphosate and regenerative agriculture. We're the guys who were doing it. We're in the field, and that was a fantastic letter. Yeah. And these are people who call themselves regenerative, but they objected totally to Bayer taking this over and making it part of their business.
Yeah. But it has to happen for that term to have any life. It will be crushed otherwise.
Yeah.
So, Eliot, can we talk about corporations a little bit?
Sure.
I shared that article, that Civil Eats article, recent article about Walmart, and we see the Walton family giving millions and millions of dollars to support, let's say, responsible biological agriculture. That's the intention, and that's the words that they use, and it's a lot of money. And at the same time, as the article points out, Walmart is the biggest single seller of food in America, of organic food and of conventional food. And their trademark and the way they got to be so big was by making sure it was the cheapest food in America. Mm-hmm. So by on one hand saying, well, we have to be more responsible about how we grow food, which means it's going to cost more, right? Being responsible means we're going to pay the people who do the work enough to make a decent living, and we're going to treat the animals with respect and have animal welfare standards. We're going to treat the soil with respect and make sure we're not just mining it. All these things that are the hallmarks of organic, of real organic, and I would say of real regenerative, those things can't actually exist in the system as defined by Walmart as a vendor, as a marketplace. So how do we make sense of that? Do we celebrate that the Waltons are getting it? Or do we say we really need to find a totally different model?
Well, they have an awful lot of money to give away because they, as a family group, they inherited 50% of the Walmart business. And is that philanthropy achieving what they would like to think? Depends on whether they want it to achieve something that makes them look good or that actually gets somewhere. we're always wanting to have cheaper food, and society is always coming to farmers because they grow food and tell them this is something that they should be concerned about so more people can afford it. But it would make much more sense to have fair and honest salaries for everybody in the US so they can afford to buy food at a price that allows the growers and the harvesters and the packers to make a fair living themselves. Because I don't think the people who want their food to be cheaper have any idea that they are making life very, very difficult for all these other people on the planet.
Yeah. Well, let's not leave out the people who work in the stores.
Yeah, or the people who
right?
work in the stores.
Who are not paid wages that allow them much security in life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've been focusing on the food rather than on the system. And the powers that be don't want us to focus on the system because the system is set up to maximize their well-being. And if in the process that minimizes the well-being of eaters, well, that's a byproduct.
I told you of the recent exploration I've had of the word monopsony. It's not the easiest word.
Yeah.
And it's a counterbalance, an adjunct to monopoly, which we're all used to because we all played the game. So we that monopoly rolls off our tongues, but monopsony does not. And a monopoly is a consolidation of power amongst producers. And a monopsony is a consolidation of power amongst merchants. So Walmart would be a monopsony, and Bear would be a monopoly. Driscoll's would be a monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
And monopolies, they tend to start around 4% of the national market. If you've got 4% of the national market, you're approaching monopolyhood. Driscoll's has over 70% of the organic berries sold in America, so they're a monopoly. And over 50% of the conventional berries. So, just an example of a monopoly, and Walmart's would clearly be a monopsony. And the problem with these is that when some company has that much power, they completely control the price and the working conditions, and so I think that's part of wait, this isn't just about food. Food is the crossroads, but this is about the structure of power and wealth and democracy in our country and in the world, for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a little bit intimidating to take that on, in the sense that if it's about food, you can grow good food and you can feed people with it. And you do address that other issue, because they're not going to Walmart to get that food, they're going to your stand. But as we said yesterday, you could do that and be so successful, and you are that successful. And I eat your food and it's really fantastic. I feel myself getting stronger and healthier by the moment. I'm serious, and it's delicious, and it has a goodness that is so obvious that has been forgotten and lost, I think, in our culture. For many people, they just never had food like that.
Yeah, well, I've never felt that Driscoll's and all of the fakes out there are any threat to this farm, because our customers love us because we produce the best tasting food they've ever eaten. And we work hard at it. It isn't like this is something that we just stumble into. Do we make big bucks doing this? No, absolutely not. We make a fair living, which is what anyone should look at. And I've always had this idea about fair prices, and that a fair price has to be fair both to the buyer and the seller. Because if the seller isn't getting a fair price, they can't afford to keep doing what they're doing. And that's an important concept here. And so all of this, Walmart taking over all of these areas because they're able to drive down prices. When you're the big vendor and you tell people, well, the most we can pay for a carrot is X, you really, you have far too much power.
It's true that your farm is essentially untouched by Walmart. You have a customer base that is loyal, and they will respond and pay what you need to charge in order to make a living and keep offering that wonderful service to them. But of course, your kids don't live here. They live out in the rest of the world. My kids don't live on my farm. Well, I have one who does right now, but and my sisters live out. That all the people I love and are dear are still very much engaged in that drama of who controls our food system.
Oh yeah, I occasionally send care packages of our food to my children, or actually just friends. There are some summer customers we've become such good friends with that for Christmas I will send them a care package of the best of the best. But otherwise they're at the mercy of that world out there.
Yeah. You have worked to change that world out there since you started farming. I mean, you haven't just done a beautiful small farm that only the people who come and get their food here know about. Your farm is enormously prominent in national conversations. You made the decision to make that so. That didn't just happen by mistake. You went out and spoke many, many times. You wrote books. You had a TV show even. You've made a lot of effort to change the system.
The best thing that COVID ever did was cancel all those conferences I used to have to go and speak at. And I just hated airplanes and airports. So I've stopped doing that.
Yeah.
Even though the COVID crisis is momentarily over, just because, I've worked hard to try and create some vague form of paradise here. And who wants to leave paradise?
Yeah.
Which all goes to show that you can create paradise with very few resources. And we started here with nothing. We cleared this land from spruce fir forest, for God's sake.
Yeah.
And it's because the biological systems out there, the ones that I keep referring to as magical, are truly because they're alive. Plants make soil. Everybody thinks soil makes plants. No, plants make the soil just by growing there. And we're running this whole farm now powered by just green manures, because it makes so much more sense. We're not bringing in any suspicious composts, the provenance of which we have no idea. And compost is a little scary that way, because by the time everything's all broken down, you have no idea what went into that compost in the first place.
I'm sure that many people who will listen to this don't really understand what that means, a self-fed farm and no inputs. So could you talk about maybe the biological process whereby you can grow your own fertility?
Yeah, well, when organic started, it was based on creating a biologically active soil. That was the key. And that meant you were doing things like green manures, crop rotations, cover crops, etc., that had nothing to do with buying inputs, but you were creating a biology on your farm. And the change in organic from back in 19...
Eliot, forgive me for a moment. When, again, because some people listening won't be farmers, when you say green manure, growing a green manure, what does that mean?
Okay. A green manure is a crop, very often a legume being able to extract nitrogen from the air and store it on its roots, that you are growing on your soil specifically to turn into the soil to add nutrients for future crops. And a cover crop is a lighter version of that, something that you're growing just to keep the soil covered and protected from leaching over winter and so forth. And a crop rotation is growing different crops year after year on the same soil, so you're not always taking the same nutrients out, and you're avoiding the buildup of pests and diseases that we'd have if you kept growing the same crop all the time. But all of the initial use of those natural techniques has been taken over in today's world by purchased organic fertilizers. And well, why are you purchasing organic matter? There is nothing easier to create on your own farm. All you need is a seed, soil, sunlight, and CO2. And yet we are running now, as I see all over the place, organic farming as if it's chemical farming, as if you have to buy in all of these nutrients. In chemical farming, you absolutely have to do that because you have nothing else to work with. But on the organic farm, my gosh, the amount of biological fertility you can create yourself just by growing green manures and cover crops. And all this no-till stuff, I'm always told by people, oh, but you should see all the research on no-till. And I ask them, and who did that research? That couldn't have been done by the people who are trying to sell herbicides, could it? Yes, it was all done by them. They're the only people that had any incentive to do it. And so we till under our green manures. We use a rototiller. We only till them into the top 4 inches. And what that does to create a soil, or a biologically active, fertile soil out of nothing, is unbelievable. And so these are all things that farmers could be doing on their own farm. And so the idea that the independent creation by farmers of the fertility on their own farm has been replaced nowadays because of the unbelievable advertising for all of these organic miracle stimulants that everybody seems to think are absolutely indispensable. This is such a crime.
I suspect that those stimulants become more important as your soil becomes more degraded, and that any impact, any addition can help stimulate in a very depleted, lifeless soil.
Yeah, if you read literature from the last, however many years human beings have been farming, from whatever culture you want to read it from, the Egyptians or the Babylonians or the Romans or the Greeks or the Asians. All of that stuff says the same thing. The way you keep a soil fertile is you put organic matter back into it. And what makes a soil unfertile is not that it runs out of nutrients, but it runs out of organic matter. And you see this throughout the literature, and yet, and the people who have learned that, who learned to focus on putting organic matter back into their soil to keep the biological life flourishing, they still have perfectly wonderful farms.
Let me ask you a question. This one will be of more interest to the farmers who are listening. You've looked at and maybe read Helen Adhow's book about the living mulches, and she had this interesting observation, which was that when she grew living mulches in the paths, and she was growing in a pretty wide path at the time, and mowed it and blew the mowings onto her growing beds, that she actually had to cut out the compost because she had too much nitrogen.
Yeah.
But she also got very high levels of potassium and some of the other elements. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Is the living mulch, is the green manure, which is a green manure, but it's kind of intercropped with the cash crop, is that making those nutrients, those mineral elements available that were locked up through the biological activity, or is it just taking the potassium from the path and putting it in the bed? And I ask this because a soil scientist whom we both respect said, yeah, you're taking it from the path and putting it in the bed, so you're depleting the path and you're going to run out of potassium. And I'm not sure that that's true. So I'd like your opinion on that.
Yeah. The genius of some of that is that the tool that you're cutting it with also throws it over into the bed. If you do what a lot of the no-till types do and bring in and spread your mulch, that's a lot of work. If you can go down your path and blow it in there that's genius. That's a great system. It takes a long time to exhaust minerals in the soil. As I said, the literature over thousands of years have pointed out that when soils become less productive, it has nothing to do with exhausting their minerals. It has to do with exhausting the organic matter in there because you're not treating the soil correctly. So I guarantee you that there is at least 1,000 years of potassium under that path that your crops can be growing on and using. And especially where you're taking it and blowing it on the bed. Well, maybe next year the bed is the path and the path is the bed, and it's a great system.
Yeah. No, it is. In the old traditional farming systems, the crop was eaten by the human, and the human's manure was returned to the cropland.
Yes.
So there really was a closed loop, and now that's pretty much one way.
Well, for a while there, though, the animal manure was taking the place of the human manure that was being dumped into the river and going out to sea. And so it was a pretty good deal, because the people who were paying attention at the time were suggesting, okay, if we're putting animal manure on the soil where we grow our food, we should put human manure on the pastures that are growing animal food. And if you did that, then you wouldn't be dumping into the river and you wouldn't be losing it all. And, during the years when we were just figuring out what was going on in agriculture, all that animal manure was making up for the fact that we were flushing the human manure down the rivers. Yeah. Could we get back to a circular system? When I was running a school in Vermont, when you were standing in the dining room, looking out the beautiful large windows, you could see a pasture, and it had sheep and cattle grazing there. But I was also aware that the septic field for the dining room, which was attached to a dorm, was under that field. And this was the perfect way to teach the students that there was no such place as a way, that if they had extra nail polish remover and they poured it down the sink, they were eating it. And it was going to come back because the septic field was right under that pasture. And so I remember being on a farm in Vermont and wandering around and finding where the dump was. And this was a 200-year-old farm. And you went through the woods where it was the edge of a field, and they just dumped all their stuff over it. And the only things you found were metal, glass, and leather, because these are the things that either didn't break down or took a long time to break down. There were no chemicals. There were no little cans of Saniflush or something like that. Yeah. So the old world was pretty safe in using its trash. But today, oh my God, if you looked at your medicine cabinet or your, where you keep your beauty supplies or whatever they are, and picture pouring that all down the drain and it coming up where your cattle are grazing, that's just a horrifying situation. Yeah. So by producing all these products, we've produced our own inability to maintain the circular system that might once have existed.
Right, right. And that could exist again and will exist again. Eliot, before we just leave this, and I know that this is something that's been explained in the world, but I would like to hear your take on it. When you say that the organic matter is what is critical for building the fertility of the soil, so what is the process whereby that organic matter makes these minerals that aren't available? The mineral part of the soil is mineral. It's filled with minerals, but they're not available to the plant.
48% of the soil is mineral.
That's right.
Yeah. There is a process going on that's been going on since plants first existed. And the roots of plants give off carbon dioxide. And if carbon dioxide is given off in the soil, it combines with soil water to produce carbonic acid. And carbonic acid is a delightful product because it has just enough power to etch nutrients which exist in all those rock particles. Soil is just ground rock, and put them in a form that's available to the plant roots. And so that is especially true when you till under, shallowly, a green manure. And it actually makes more sense to do that and let the carbon dioxide turn into carbonic acid in the soil than to put everything in a compost heap. And because if you let it happen in the soil, you have all these forces going for you. And you read the 1938 yearbook of the Department of Agriculture, and whoever wrote the article in there that I'm thinking of, just goes on how this is the power, organic matter and its effect on the soil is the power that is making everything work in the soil. that is making the minerals available and so forth. And rather than just saying organic matter, sometimes I prefer to say humus, because humus is the end result of the decomposition of organic matter in the soil. And it's the stuff that makes the soil mellow and easy to work and things like that.
And what about the mycorrhizal fungi? Because that is,
yeah,
is a big part of it.
They're there, and they are especially effective at making phosphorus available to plants. And I'm told that if I till, I'm killing mycorrhizal fungi. But I have the feeling that if they were there once, they will come back immediately because there's spores in the soil. And anyway, I've never seen a disadvantage to tilling in all the time I've been here. In fact, I will state that we wouldn't have a farm here if we hadn't spent 50 years tilling local organic matter into this soil, because we had nothing to start with. We had to create what's here. And yeah, at the very beginning, there was a wonderful large horse manure pile nearby that allowed this farm to get a leg up. But since then, it's just been tilling in organic matter.
Well, I'm not convinced that tillage ends mycorrhizal fungi, because we've had our soil tested and we're doing very well on that. Sometimes we till, sometimes we don't till. We've tried this, that, and the other thing. I have no religion about it. I think that the questions are very interesting. And you and I have talked about how we're really just at the beginning, not at the end of all this.
Oh, we are barely at the beginning.
Barely at the beginning.
I mean, when you and I are talking about the unknowns out there, we both agree that there is just so much to learn. What if we did, and oh my gosh, yeah. And especially all the biological effects of this crop growing, and how does that affect that crop next year? I mean, this is, if you want to start an endless research project, this is the endless research project.
Right. I said we experimented with growing alyssum under the tomatoes, and well, that's great, alyssum, but there are like a couple thousand other plants that you might grow there too.
Yeah.
And I have no idea what the impacts are. It's for the next lifetime probably. So, Eliot, as we come to our conclusion, what are your thoughts, or anything that you'd like to say? You know, we've talked, I guess the one thing we didn't say, and I was going to talk about this, was you have used the image of that the reason you got into organic farming and that it excited you was it built on the part of you that was a rock climber, and that you loved the challenge of it, and you loved the demands it placed on you to be very competent and to pay very close attention. And the thing you liked best about it was you never got to the top of the mountain.
Well, the mountain doesn't have a top. That's the beauty of this. You're always going to find something new to learn. And if you're climbing either rocks or mountains, standing on top is the dullest part of the day. The fun thing was trying to figure out how to get there, which is why I've always had a passion for rock climbing. And also, you know, when we were starting out and there were all these experts, we were anything but experts. They all had PhDs. None of us had PhDs in anything but English literature or something like that. And they were saying you couldn't do this. And we were doing it. That was the best part of the whole thing. Us totally untutored hippies were out here. And what is amusing, and I've been here since 1968, which is a long time, not once in all those years has an entomologist from the the University of Maine ever come down here to find out what's going on? I mean, when you think about it, I'm right next to them. They have entomologists who are claiming you need pesticides, you can't grow without them. And I'm down here quietly disproving everything they're telling people. And nobody's ever showed up to talk to me. That I find that disappointing.
That is changing. I have definitely had entomologists from the University of Vermont come to visit our farm, and with great curiosity and affection, as somebody said to me, entomologists are very benign. They're very kind, curious people in my experience. I understand that you're talking about people who had a very chemical outlook, but the entomologists I know do not have that outlook. They're really interested in how this works.
My favorite entomologist story was on my trip around European organic farms with the USDA's study group back in 1980. I set up a European tour for them and took them. And one of the members of their study team was the dean of entomology at a major Midwestern university who was on loan to them. And we were visiting this really exceptional farmer, standing in the edge of the field, talking to him through the interpreter. It was in Germany. And the entomologist left the group and wandered out on the field. And he's leaning over and sweeping his hand above the crops to see what insects and stuff are there. And after about 5 minutes, we noticed he was just standing there. And we looked over at him and he said, "We can't do this well with pesticides." And that was such a striking thing. I never thought he was the same person again, because he had seen God in his splendors, heard the touch that nature renders. Anyway, that's a line from one of my favorite poets. He'd seen that it actually worked. And he was honest enough at the end of the day to tell the farmer that he'd learned more there in the last hour and a half than he did at any of the hundreds of conferences he went to all the time. Yeah. Fascinating.
Vincent tells that story, Vincent Stanley, of at Patagonia when they were trying to switch over to organic cotton, and the team at Patagonia really didn't get it. And they explain it, they lecture it, they didn't get it. So then they decided to take them on bus tours out to the fields. And
this is great.
They took them out to the chemical fields, and it stank because they used so much chemicals on cotton.
Yep.
It stank and your eyes hurt, and it was a horrible place to be, and the soil was clearly dead. There were no worms, there was no life in it. And all they had to do was take people out for a day and then take them to an organic one. And they went, okay, we get it. Right? Yeah, we don't want to be part of that anymore.
Yes.
We want to do this.
Yes.
We want this to be the world we're building.
Yes.
So that's that same experiential education of getting people to actually see the difference, and they understand it intuitively at that point.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of the experiences like I've just been relating, we scared the dickens out of the other side because we were threatening everything that was at the basis of their business. They were selling pesticide. We didn't need pesticides. They were selling soluble fertilizers. We didn't need soluble fertilizers. And you sort of wished they'd had the sense to say, okay, these guys don't need the products we're now making. Could we make something that they would be interested in? That's interesting. And I happen to think that even back in the early days, if the chemical companies had offered better soil analysis, plant tissue analysis, ways for us amateurs to keep our finger on the pulse of that wonderful system out there, we would have signed up immediately. They would have had a whole business of advising good farming, but there's no money in that. Selling services, there's only money in selling products. And as Scott used to say, the ideal product for an industrialist is something that wears out quickly and leaves a habit behind. And chemical fertilizers are about as good as you can get on that one.
It was, it must have been, a pretty special thing to have Scott as your mentor.
Oh dear. Best, I used to work with him part-time in the woods when I first came here. And it was like the best college history course you ever had in your life. I mean, unbelievable. The guy had been everywhere, done everything. Yeah. No, that was just delightful.
All right, Eliot, last words. Anything you want to say that I left out?
No, but I do want to say, Dave, that this whole project you're doing with the Real Organic Project is so totally worthwhile. And without you, it wouldn't be happening. And I think you need to understand there's a lot of us out there who are very appreciative of the enormous amount of time and energy you put into this, and wished you could be cloned and double cloned and triple cloned. Yeah. And whether, and you and I probably agree on this, whether there's any way we will ever come out the right end of this, boy, the forces arrayed against us are so incredible. But I have a quote over there from Churchill during the war, and he said, "Never give up, never give up, never give up." So we're not going to give up.
Yeah.
And I hope we continue to worry the bastards to death.
All right. Eliot, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. Our movement is growing because you're subscribing and sharing these podcasts with your friends. So keep it up and leave us a rating and a review as well. You can find a video version of this interview on our newly designed website, realorganicproject.org, or on our YouTube channel. And you can join us every Tuesday for a new episode featuring voices from the organic movement. See you next time.